The head of the Australian Federal Police says he's urgently reviewing war crimes allegations against 3 prominent Sri Lankans. The claims revolve around acts allegedly committed during the final months of Sri Lanka's bloody civil war. 2 of the 3 men have connections to Australia. One's the serving Sri Lankan High Commissioner. The third is the country's president, and he'll be in Australia next week at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, as Sarah Dingle reports.
For Chogam, human rights in Sri Lanka was already a touchy subject. Canada says it's deeply concerned, and the Australian government is being lobbied to raise the issue next week. But now there's another complication.
These allegations have come to light since the Sri Lankan High Commissioner has come to Australia. These allegations are now being looked at by the Australian Federal Police.
Sri Lanka.
Those allegations relate to war crimes and are levelled at 3 Sri Lankan state officials, including the country's representative in Australia.
Such allegations are baseless and unsubstantiated. In the contrary, I have been commended for my role during the period of my career.
The Australian Federal Police is evaluating a legal submission made by the International Commission of Jurists calling for an investigation of senior Sri Lankan military and state officials for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
We asked for that to be assessed as a matter of urgency, and that assessment is still ongoing.
730 understands the allegations of war crimes point to 3 senior figures in particular. Sri Lanka's representative in Australia, High Commissioner Admiral Thisara Samarasinha, who was a commander of naval operations in the war-ravaged north. Dual Australian-Sri Lankan citizen Dr Palita Kahona, a former senior DFAT official for the Australian government and Foreign Secretary of Sri Lanka during the final years of the war, and Sri Lankan President Mahinda Rajapaksa.
Do you have any concluding thoughts about
Jurist John Dowd has helped compile evidence which he says points to breaches of international law.
War crimes relate primarily to shelling of civilians in the no-fire zone, the bombing of civilians, hospitals.
Look, with my own eyes, I saw a hospital being shelled.
We never deliberately attacked any single civilian.
Admiral Samarasinha was one of several senior high commanders honoured by Sri Lankan President Mahinda Rajapaksa for his role in the 25-year conflict. It was waged between the brutal Tamil Tigers, notorious for tactics like suicide bombing, and the militarily superior Sri Lankan government. But unease is mounting about what happened in the final months, when the government had the Tamil Tigers and hundreds of thousands of civilians surrounded.
We have produced evidence for the investigation of potential war crimes.
The International Commission of Jurists will contend that the Sri Lankan Navy fired at civilians on shore. There's no allegation of direct involvement by the High Commissioner in these actions. Instead, the submission argues the High Commissioner has responsibility for what happened under his command.
My most important achievement in the military was saving these civilians who were under the clutches of terrorism. So there is no base logic to target civilians. I reject that.
The reason I decided to tell my story was because I've always believed in justice.
In the final months, international observers fled. It was a closed war, but now one young Australian has come forward with her account of what happened.
And I really want Australians to understand that I saw a massacre of people.
The story of Meena Krishnamurthy is crucial to the war crime submission. She's one of just 3 Australians who were in the conflict zone until the end, and she's the only one to ever be identified.
I really wanted to learn Tamil.
In 2004, she travelled to Sri Lanka to work in an orphanage. There, she met her partner, a man who she says worked as an accountant within the civil administration of the LTTE, the militant Tamil Tigers. But in 2008, when the war intensified, they joined crowds of displaced Tamils on the move. As medical supplies and food in the battle zone ran out, Meena Krishnamurthy began to help in the hospitals, where she befriended a doctor.
And my partner begged me not to go. He was like, look, you know, they bomb hospitals, just don't go. I beg you, don't go. And only because of that, I didn't go. And that doctor who I got to know, she went that morning at 7:30 or 6:30, and she was killed by 9:30 because while she was administering a patient, a shell, like not just one, many shells fell at that hospital, and I went to her funeral.
I would categorically say it is not the learning of Sri Lankan military to fire at a hospital. That has never happened in our military.
Meena Krishnamurthy and her partner had a compelling reason to worry about the safety of hospitals. She was carrying their child.
So I went to the hospital with contractions, and when I was there, they told me that my child was dead. I didn't even get to see him. They just put him in a bucket and then, buried him. I really wanted to be, I was ready to be a mother.
But she says this wasn't the end of her ordeal. Ms Krishnamurthy says sometime later she was at a coastal clinic and had to dodge fire coming from the sea.
While we were there, we heard like a different kind of a sound, and when I asked people around me, they were like, oh, that's cannon fire. And it was coming from the direction of the ocean.
Her story gives the lie to what the Sri Lankan government has said, that it did not target civilians and didn't target hospitals.
I am totally denying any allegations, whoever it may be, that the Sri Lanka Navy fired at civilians. You must understand the terrorists had their own vessels which was confronting the Sri Lanka Navy.
Next week, the President of Sri Lanka will attend the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Perth. The International Commission of Jurists says that Sri Lanka should agree to an independent war crimes tribunal or be suspended from the Commonwealth.
They've got to take membership seriously, and the war crimes tribunal necessity in Sri Lanka is overwhelming.
Meena Krishnamurthy's claims are untested, but the International Commission of Jurists is taking her evidence seriously.
It's not just Tamils, for all the people that were affected personally by the war and who have been persecuted. The least we can ask for is some sort of justice.
So I have absolutely no fear of such allegations, because the best is the truth, and I know the truth.
And tonight the Australian Greens have sent a letter to the Prime Minister asking her to demand the Sri Lankan government recall its High Commissioner. Sarah Dingle reporting.